we could do a program just on the last two slides on how you get Lucasfilm there and do those RFPs and have an anchor tenant. But it really does take a little bit of the management and the control. I was fortunate, two military bases, the Army Depot in Sacramento. Dick Fisher was our private contractor and myself. We made all the decisions, took it to the city council, and got it done. Williams Gateway, or Williams Air Force Base in Mesa, Arizona, we had a team, and the city just bought it from the Air Force. We put about $4 million a year in until all the infrastructure was done. We stole a lot of information, though, from the Sonoran Institute, and we're fortunate today to have Luthor Propst here with us, who's authored 3 books, has done a tremendous amount of work in the West that has been borrowed by economic developers, urban planners, and open space and recreation people from all over the world. And they would come to northern Arizona, where I worked in Flagstaff, to visit the Navajo Nation and Lake Powell, and of course the San Francisco Peaks. It was a combination of natural beauty of the Grand Canyon, the natural resources that we had available to us, the University of Northern Arizona, who was an important player, and access to research and thought thinkers like Luthor that could help us build an environment that could be sustainable, that could create jobs, and could coexist with a lot of different personalities, nationalities, and people of the land. So our last speaker today, before we start taking any questions, is Luthor Propst. I'd like him to come up here and share his experiences with us of how we can create some economic engines.
So, I'm the only speaker between you guys and your weekend. So David told me to take about 90 minutes, but I'll try to shorten that a little bit. Thank you for your kind, he didn't say any such thing. I feel like a real renegade because I'm not using PowerPoint images. Instead, I'm just going to talk. So if that really irritates people, please let me know, but that's your only choice today. As David alluded to, I've had the great good fortune to spend the last 22 years, traveling all around the West, including here in California, including a project just down the street here in the Carmel Valley. But I've had the great good fortune to spend the last 20-some years working with communities, rural mostly, some urban, working with public land managers at that intersection of prosperous communities, ecologically sound, resilient landscapes, and prosperous economies and vibrant, livable communities where people want to be. Long time ago, in 1997, I published a book called Balancing Nature and Commerce in Gateway Communities. And I looked back through it, just getting ready for this talk, and it's amazing how much things have changed. It's also amazing how things kind of some ways stay the same. But when I wrote the book, along with a couple of other folks, we were struck by the lack of meaningful, and I'm going to try to be polite here since you guys don't know me, but we were struck by the lack of meaningful interaction, the lack of synergy between people who advocate for conservation, the public land side of my career, and the people who advocate for economic prosperity, economic development in communities. And I know that's changed at this point here in California anyway. But and we're going to talk about that a little bit because it's been interesting for me to work kind of in both sides of that world and see how often they just speak right past each other in a lot of cases. I'm going to make 5 points this afternoon. The first is kind of a foundation point. According to almost any poll you'll look at, in fact, I would say any poll you'll look at that's not meant to grind an axe, the public believes by a significant majority that conservation, and let's define that broadly, sustainability, smart growth, you name it, but conservation defined broadly benefits them as individuals and benefits the community, society as a whole. At the same time, for the general public, conservation and building and development patterns is much less of an important issue than I wished. And I'm sure just by the fact that you were here today, much less of an issue than it is for you. So I'm going to read 2 questions from a poll that Robin Rather did. She's a great pollster and smart growth advocate out of Texas. Her father used to be on TV occasionally. She was doing some polling for the Ford Foundation. And listen to this, because I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. Economic growth and environmental quality are interconnected goals. We can't have one without the other. Who agrees with that premise? Okay, who disagrees? Okay, for the general public, 58% agree with that premise. I think the percentage was somewhat higher in this group. So yeah, the public thinks that conservation doesn't necessarily undercut our economic prosperity goals. But with that in mind, the public doesn't care very much. Now we would like to ask you some questions about the issues our nation is facing today. How much of a priority do you think each of the following issues should be for our elected officials? Okay, economy. 85% of the general public. Jobs. 82%. Now, just as an aside, I didn't see this in the poll. I hope there aren't many people in the room here, and I kind of wonder about those who say the economy is important but jobs isn't. I mean, kind of, what's up with that 3%? If you have an answer, please let me know. I don't know. So education, 63%. Big drop. Big drop from jobs and economy to education. Energy development continues to drop, 51%. Global warming, some might take a guess, 30%. Might be higher in some parts of the country than others. 30% of the public thinks global warming fits into that category. And then, in the cellar, in the basement, land use patterns or land development patterns. Okay, this room is not a good cross-section of the general public, okay? 16%. So the stuff that all of us live and breathe and think about all the time, not so important to everybody else. I'm presenting that as just a foundation point as we talk about something more to do with national monuments. Second point I want to make is National Monument Proclamation. The proclamation of a national monument, in this case the Fort Ord National Monument, is a potential, and I want to stress potential, economic asset. It can be an asset. It's not necessarily an asset. It depends upon what we do. And we really means you, not me. But we as a society, I should say. Depends on what we do for it to provide a significant economic value. And that's what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes. Third point, to realize the potential that the proclamation of a national monument provides the regional economy, we really have to rethink. We have to reimagine how we view natural assets, recreational assets, and economic assets. And I mean that whether you come at this from the idea of keep it wild, or let's go shred it on our mountain bikes, or let's use it as a way to prosper, we all have to rethink our kind of traditional beliefs. And I know that here people have already done so, but I'll go through these points anyway. The first most important aspect of that is that we simply can't just think of a national monument proclamation as some way promoting only tourism. It can't be just tourism. Tourism's important, but we really have to go beyond that. And by tourism, I'll include second home development as well. It's not just about bringing in the tourists. It's not even, in my opinion, primarily about tourism. And I'm a big fan of tourism. I love to travel myself. I work in that kind of world a lot. But I frankly think tourism is overrated as a strategy for creating economic prosperity, for creating quality, livable communities where people want to live. Important, but for a community, there's a threshold. When you get too much, it becomes more of a liability than a value. The key, in my estimation, to a national monument being an engine for economic prosperity is to avoid over-reliance on tourism, to avoid over-reliance on just recreation spending, even though that's certainly important. The key for utilizing a national monument for economic benefit is the fact that this nation is now driven almost entirely by what we should just kind of lump in and call the knowledge economy. It's the ability to attract highly skilled workers that creates economic prosperity almost anywhere. And I'm saying that because, you know, we produce food and fiber, but that's going to, producing food and fiber at low cost has a real benefit of being a stable economic activity. Tourism, up and down, doesn't create year-round jobs in a lot of cases. High quality of life and the sense of place that so many speakers have talked about so well, high quality of life and sense of place attract bright, creative people and attracts their ideas, their energy, and their capital. So what does that have to do with national monuments? That's what we're going to talk about. In my opinion, a lot. Okay, conservation advocates, and I've been guilty of this. The Sonoran Institute has kind of led this effort over time in some ways, but conservation advocates have tried to demonstrate. We've commissioned all kinds of studies. Sonoran Institute spun off the group called Headwaters Economics that has done some work here. We've tried to demonstrate the economic values of parks, monuments, public lands for years. We do lots of studies, lots of different kinds of studies, and frankly, now that I've left the Sonoran Institute and I'm no longer having to defend, you know, I can just sit back and throw stones now. It's great. You should try it one day. You know, we haven't really hit it, we haven't done it correctly. The public land management agencies love to do visitor use studies, you know, where you find out how many people come to the area, how long do they stay, how much do they spend each day. You know, visitor use study or an economic impact analysis or you know, they're done somewhat differently. And you can show how many people come, what does it mean for the economy. You plug in that magic wand called the multiplier effect, and then you show how it's got a lot of impact. All of that is countered by a catchphrase I heard first in Moab, Utah, where the local county commissioner told me that all these mountain bikers come to town, they're wearing cut-off jeans, they got a $20 bill in their pocket, they leave a week later, and they haven't changed either one. Is that the first? You know, you can do all the research in the world, but when the county commissioners are, you know, when that's where they're coming from, that's a challenge. I'm not sure that that's particularly scientific, but there's some truth behind it, or it wouldn't be, or I don't think you would hear it as often as we do. We do economic aggregate studies. The Outdoor Industry Association does a study every year that says the outdoor recreation industry provides, this last year, $646 billion worth of economic activity. And, you know, it's hard for me to stay awake reading their annual report. It's you know, it's kind of generic, and it's like, okay, so what? What does that mean for me? And what does that mean for our community and our national monument? And, you know, it's okay, but I don't think it's particularly helpful. Groups like the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership do the same thing, looking at how much hunters provide to different economies around the country. And it really doesn't, it's just not policy relevant, in my opinion. And it doesn't give any community a path forward, which we'll talk about. The Sonoran Institute has done, and others have done, these prosperity correlation studies. You know, you look at a county, there wasn't a national monument, now there is, and they're continuing to grow at the same rate they did. Again, it doesn't tell you a whole lot about what the national monument did. In fact, we did some research that we never published on the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument in Utah. And it was proclaimed during the Clinton administration, 96, 97, I'm drawing a blank. We found out that that declaration or that proclamation kind of benefited the economy a little bit, maybe, but then in 2008 it caused the economy to crash. Now wait, maybe there were other factors at work. So, you know, the point is it's really hard to do that kind of an analysis because there's so much going on other than a proclamation of a national monument. So there's a lot of correlation of factors. What we did find, which doesn't have much to do with conservation, is that around the West, and Monterey County is different in some ways and similar in some ways, a national monument proclamation is more likely to benefit the local economy if there is a pretty good-sized airport. The figure that seems to be the threshold was about 20,000 enplanements, you know, 20,000 people that come and go on an airplane a year. So, you know, doesn't have to be O'Hare, but it's got to be more than a general aviation airport. So if you're near an airport, that helps a lot. If you have an educated workforce, that helps a lot. If you have amenities, basically a ski town, that helps a lot. So that doesn't tell us a whole lot. You know, the communities where people can fly in for the weekend, where people have moved there that are well educated and bring jobs, they're going to do okay, and the proclamation might not be all that important. So a couple points I'm making. Tourism and recreation are important, particularly they're important for all kind of reasons, but they're not the foundation of a diverse, prosperous, mature global economy in a global economy. Second, what's the relationship between national monuments and the knowledge economy? That's what I want to talk about. I got really frustrated by the fact that there was so little information on that question. What's the correlation between the protection of lands, and particularly the managed by the Bureau of Land Management, and economic prosperity? So, with frankly a lot of pushback, we finally did a study that I was amazed in 2011 had never been done. This type of study had never been done. The Sonoran Institute just recently finished the study. A group called the Outdoor Alliance is probably going to help promote it because it shows the value of outdoor recreation. But we called it a worker attraction study. And I want to take a few minutes and describe it. I hope I've got time. A study done by the Sonoran Institute and the Eller School of Management at the University of Arizona. It was funded by the Bureau of Land Management and Arizona Public Service, the big public utility in Arizona. We interviewed hiring managers and HR directors at employers, at large employers of highly skilled workers. We interviewed 23 managers representing about 10% of the workforce of highly skilled workers in the Phoenix and Tucson area. This study should be done in a lot of other places. Interviewed 23 HR people, sent out a much bigger survey, but we did the interviews, about 10% of the workforce. And by highly skilled workers, we define it broadly: medicine, engineering, law, finance, aerospace, architecture, academia. Couple of things. First, 84% of the highly skilled workers that we surveyed, or the pool that was surveyed, are non-natives to Arizona. It's a highly mobile workforce. It's a higher percentage than the state as a whole. People tend to graduate from grad school. They pretty much can choose where to go. And in this case, I'm not talking Richard Florida, the creative class. I'm talking the people that work at the large engineering firms and so forth. So highly mobile. Then we did the kind of the pairwise comparisons, the analytic hierarchy method. Couple of things. 4 major factors in how you attract highly skilled workers to your community. The first is pay. If you look at it as 100%, pay was 31%. Cost of living came in at 29%. Okay, pay and cost of living are things that your local governments really can't influence, other than on the margins and indirectly. Lifestyle. Okay, remember, lifestyle came in at 28% of the whole. And then schools came in at 12% of the whole. Okay, here in California, schools might be higher, and Mary Jo will get mad at me for saying this, because if you graduate from college on the East Coast and you really care about educating your children, you're not going to move to Arizona, so you won't be in the pool. That's kind of harsh, but it's close to true. You're going to stay in Cambridge or Boston or something. So we skewed those figures. I got to work on figuring out how to fix that. So, okay, within lifestyle, 39% of the people said the most important factor within lifestyle was climate. Okay? We can't change the climate. Oh, wait, maybe we can. But if you're in Arizona, not so much for the better. And I'll say it's not a very targeted public policy option. So climate, 39%, kind of beyond what the local community can deal with. And then secondly, outdoor recreation, 27%. And outdoor recreation means hiking, bird watching, mountain biking, even skiing, because there is a ski hill, as David knows, not too far away. So outdoor recreation was the second most important lifestyle factor, followed by sports. And by sports, I mean golf and tennis, softball. You know, the young people now play kickball, which we always played in elementary school, but now it's kind of like for the 20-somethings. I don't know why I even said that. Sports, and then culture and spectator sports, which we lump together. Shows you we're from Arizona. But spectator sports, 15%. So outdoor recreation becomes, when you carve out the things you cannot influence through local policy decisions, such as pay, cost of living, climate, outdoor recreation becomes a pretty big deal. And even when you include those, it's 7.6% of that community's total ability to attract highly skilled workers, according to those who hire them, comes from the ability of these people to go out and play on trails and public lands and so forth. I think that's amazing, partly because it's really cheap when the federal government gives the land. It's really cheap to manage it compared to schools and all kinds of other things. So it's an important attractant for highly skilled workers. And my premise is we got to think of these national monuments for their ability, manage them for their ability to attract highly skilled workers. Hiking and mountain biking were the top two. So the point I want to make is I think the following narrative is outdated. Access to trails and natural areas attract tourists and second homeowners who spend money. It also supports bicycle shops and outdoor stores, so national monuments and other protected lands support economic development. That's an old, outdated narrative in my estimation. In my estimation, the narrative that we really should be pursuing, and I think particularly here where you've got the airport, where you've got San Francisco just a couple of hours to the north, is access to trails and natural areas produce economic prosperity and resilience. It does so not only with tourism and recreation, but also by contributing to the local conditions that attract and retain highly skilled workers. And I think that's the key for the national monument. Because highly skilled workers in the knowledge economy are the engine for prosperity in the complex global economy in which we live now, particularly if you're not in a deeply rural community. So what are those conditions? I'm going to be quick. I'm just going to say 5 things. What are the conditions by which a national monument can really help contribute to the attraction of highly skilled workers? The first is you got to have an authentic destination, and you've got that with Fort Ord. You know, 23% of Monterey County is public land. Much of it is national forest, kind of outback. That land is important for a lot of values, but Fort Ord National Monument is more important because of its proximity. And the second is you got to have the branding and marketing. Okay? Outdoor enthusiasts, backcountry skiers, mountain bikers, road bikers, hikers, bird watchers. Outdoor enthusiasts are notorious because we, and I'll say we because I put myself in this category, we're herd animals, but we don't like to think we are. We want to think we're the rugged individualist that goes where nobody else ever goes. But you know what? We all go to the same places pretty much. You know, we kind of pretend that we spend a whole lot of time in the Ventana Wilderness or Alaska or whatever, but most of the times we're going close to home because we just got off work and it's 4 o'clock and we want to get a quick trail run in or something like that. So we tend to be herd animals. We tend to go to the same trailheads, and we tend to publicize those. You know, there's 24 towns in southern Utah that could be Moab, but Moab became Moab because a couple of local uranium miners opened a bike shop and got to be really buzzworthy. And so Fort Ord is not just important and not just able to contribute because of the quality of the trails, but because of the buzz around the trails. And with Sea Otter, you're in a great position to do that. So we're herd animals, especially mountain bikers. You know, we spend more time, you know, prancing around the parking lot in spandex than we do. That's a bad thought, isn't it? I'm sorry. You know, we're all around the parking lot looking at each other's bicycles and so forth, and it's, you know. So the second point is the branding and marketing. You've got to make a buzz about it because despite what people think, we're not talking about the rare person that really does go way out a whole lot. Third, and this has been talked about so much already, but it's all about a critical mass of attractive natural and cultural resources. You know, the coffee shop, the brew pub, the trails that connect neighborhoods and the pathways, the playgrounds for kids. It's the variety of opportunities, and a national monument's only going to be valuable when it's part of a package. The fourth is, you know, and this goes back to balancing nature and commerce. It's so important for communities to set aside the cultural divides and for the environmental advocates and the outdoor recreation advocates and the economic development advocates and the smart growth advocates and the historic preservation advocates to really sit down together. It's just critical to do so and to hammer out a shared vision for the community and for the public lands that reconciles the values of these different gaps. And to do that requires, it just requires dialogue. It requires meaningful public engagement. It requires trust to be built through that engagement among camps that are either at odds with each other or that just don't talk to each other. And it's the importance of that dialogue why I think this gathering today is such a critical step. And I want to offer my congratulations to the Fort Ord Reuse Authority, to California State University at Monterey Bay, Michael and Eduardo, for your convening this, because it's critical to making a national monument an economic engine for this region. And so good luck and Godspeed, and have a great weekend.